The information presented in this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for clinical mental health treatment. If you or someone you know is experiencing a mental health crisis, please dial 988 or head to your nearest emergency room.
Welcome to the Black People Die by Suicide 2 podcast, where we discuss all things mental health with an emphasis on suicide in the Black community. I'm your co-host, Jordan.
And I am your co-host, T-Kea.
Welcome. If this is your first time tuning in, thank you. We are so glad that you found us. If you are returning, welcome back. Thank you for sticking with us. We hope that you find something helpful in this episode. If you do find it helpful, share it with your friends, your family, your timeline, whoever.
Your sneaky link, share it with whoever you decide to
share it with whoever you want to share it with. If you got some feedback for us, hit us up on Instagram. Let us know. We would love your feedback. Just welcome to the show. So as usual, when we get started, we like to check in and really tap into how we're feeling. T-Kea, how are you today?
You know, I feel well rested, which is great because, T-Kea has been running like the Energizer Bunny. And I definitely needed some rest. And I think I mentioned to you earlier that I don't think I realized how tired or exhausted I was because I'd just been on autopilot until like eventually I woke up one morning and my body was like, get somebody else to do it. So I was like out for the count for 2 days. I just was in the bed for like a good day and a half, 2 days. And I feel well rested. So well rested. And the other word I would say is excited.
Okay.
Yes. Excited about what's to come.
How am I feeling today? I'm just sitting here like I didn't know this question was going to be immediately in the episode, but I'm feeling a little bit of anxiety. I don't really know what it's stemming from. A multitude of things, but a little bit anxious, but it feels manageable. I have to say. I had a really, really good therapy appointment this week. I actually had a good appointment with both my therapist and my psychiatric nurse practitioner, who is amazing. My appointment with her was on Friday morning, and we spend more time laughing than anything.
Those are always, see, that's how you know you have a good relationship.
She is the sweetest person. I was trying to decide if I wanted to get on some sort of medication, but I'm going to stick with just therapy itself for now and kind of see how things go. Mm-hmm. But I feel very confident that if I do need assistance, I know my new nurse practitioner, she got me. Like, she's really, really sweet. I'm so happy I found her. I guess for anyone who's listening and you're like me and you kind of struggle with finding a psychiatrist, you can try a psychiatric nurse practitioner. It might be something to consider. I find that they have really, really good bedside manner. That's not to say that psychiatrists don't, but I've had really, really positive experiences with psych NPs.
Yes, I would agree. So I had 3 that I could think offhand, psychiatrists. Terrible bedside manners. Yeah. And one of them was flirting with me. I could have reported him, but that's another podcast for another day. Yes, he was definitely very inappropriate. And but I have a psychiatric nurse practitioner now, and it's going well. So yeah, the last 2 that I had, one, and I'm always trying to give business to Black women, mm-hmm. but unfortunately the 2 Black women that I had were psychiatrists. They both were just, they weren't for me. And so that's why we always tell people, like, if you're looking, whether it's a therapist, a psychiatrist, or psychiatric nurse practitioner, it really is like dating. I think a lot of times we just go with the one because it's like, oh, well, they know what's best. But a lot of times we have to really push ourselves to try other providers, because just because that's the first one that you go to, that doesn't mean that's the one that you have to stick with.
Right. Yeah, that's a really, really good point. So yeah, as you can see, we both have psych MPs. Try a psychiatric nurse practitioner if you are having some trouble with a psychiatrist, because they're great. They've been great for me so far, but it's like you said, it's like dating. You just never know what you're going to get until you try it out a few times, and if it's not for you, move on.
Yep, same like therapists.
Yep.
If that therapist is not for you, find another one.
Yep.
It really is like dating. So.
So today we are joined by a fantastic guest. We met her last year at the walk in Annapolis with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, right? I just remembered AFSP. I'm like, what does that stand for? Yes, the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention. She is fantastic. I'm going to read an intro for her because I want to make sure I get everything right, because the sister is impressive, okay? So we are joined by Lauren Jenkins. She's a licensed clinical professional counselor, a certified clinical trauma professional, an empowerment speaker, a mental health and suicide prevention advocate, and a trainer. Lauren, welcome. We are so excited to have you today. So great to see you again.
Hello.
How are you doing? You have to check in and tell us how you're feeling.
I love the question. I love that opening question. How am I feeling? Today as I sit here and reflect, I'm doing well. I feel good. I feel grounded, and I just feel such beautiful energy in the space, just amongst some great Black women who are on a mission trying to raise awareness about suicide prevention, and mental health and wellness. And I already love the conversation that's happened so far.
Thank you so much. You have the kindest smile. Like, this is probably why I was so excited to see you again. I'm like, yes. She has the sweetest smile. Thank you so much for joining us. So for today's topic, we're going to focus on sort of trauma and how it affects the body, the mind. We know that it's a powerful thing. I'm a person that is living with diagnosis of PTSD. So, trauma is definitely something that I have experienced and dealt with for many, many years. But we wanted to get your perspective because you are a professional that works in the space with, of trauma, particularly. But I guess if you could start by just telling us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as already shared in the bio, yes, I am by profession. I am a licensed clinician, as well as a certified clinical trauma professional. That's profession. But personally, I am an advocate for this work. I also have my own personal journey that where my own challenges with mental health challenges, particularly anxiety, as well as lived experience with suicidality and suicide attempt, was the catalyst essentially to me wanting to get into this work. Earlier, I heard you all talking about, make sure you find the right fit for a therapist. Find, I'm psychiatric nurse practitioner. My best friend, she's a doctor, psychiatric nurse practitioner. You got to find what fits. And the reason why I got into this work is that, one, I didn't see a lot of people who looked like me, and it was perpetuating harm and also contributing to even my own kind of traumatization in this trying to find help. But two, I just wanted to make sure that people had a space who were helping others so they could help well. And so as I navigated about 7 years working on my own healing, I finally did that leap and got into this work. When I'm not doing therapy, I am an advocate. You see me at the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, AFSP walks. I also am a trainer of Soul Shop. I think y'all had Tandra on before.
Yeah.
With the yep. And so I am a trainer of Soul Shop for Black churches, Black leaders. And also I sit on the board of directors of a nonprofit in Anne Arundel County, Maryland, called the Life of Joy Foundation, where we foster a holistic approach to suicide prevention and mental health. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. I have my own business. It's called The Journey to Well LLC, helping those who help others help well. That's the whole premise of it.
Love it. I love it.
Oh my gosh.
Lauren, like your just energy and just vibe, it's just so positive. Like I can just feel it through the screen. Okay, maybe it's just me. I don't know.
Agreed.
But just so happy to just have you here. And as we were talking about trauma, I really would like you to explain it in layman's terms, and because on social media, I feel like people overuse the word trauma And
Yeah.
everything ain't trauma. And
Yeah.
I feel like it's important. We know there's like little T, big T, and what may be considered trauma to one person might not be for the next person. But I do feel like just it's great that we're talking about trauma and mental health, but there are so many
Absolutely.
people who don't have knowledge and they're like using clinical terminology very wrong. So
Yeah. Yeah.
can you speak about what trauma is and how can someone know like if it's actually trauma or is it just stress?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So, look, I try to break it down. I try to give shared language because it is. A lot of times we'll utilize this to capture so much. So, let me first start off and say trauma first is what has happened to us. Okay. Trauma is going to look different from every single person. It is a unique experience. And the way that I always talk about trauma, it is your emotional response to stressful events that it either have been witnessed or happened to you. But the key thing that's important is it is perceived as harmful or life threatening to the person. Perceived as harmful and life threatening. And maybe it actually was, but it's important to emphasize it felt life threatening. And
Mm-hmm.
the thing about it is, our body naturally is created to respond to very high stressful situations. But when it becomes something that causes us to feel like our life has been threatened, and even if it's not there, that's when we begin to start seeing those signs and symptoms that leads us to this piece of trauma in itself is not a diagnosis. I heard one of you
Right.
shared that, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, or acute stress disorder. The thing that makes it go from, okay, this was traumatic, to now I have a diagnosable disorder, we look at three things, right? Duration, impact, and frequency. So, duration, how long have those symptoms where you find yourself in spaces, if something drops and you immediately are just triggered or overwhelmed, how often does that happen? The frequency. And then what is, and this is the key part, what is that impact? Like, does it impact my ability with my satisfying relationships, my ability to just have a overall quality of life, being able to carry out daily activities? That is really, really important. And so when I'm asked this question, I really start off by saying trauma is what has happened to you. And where we move to where it becomes a diagnosable disorder is when it actually impacts kind of those areas I talked about a little bit earlier. So I hope I gave you a lot, but I hope that really answered the question. You know, oh, go ahead.
No, I think you answered it, and I think it's important when we're talking about trauma or even a mental health diagnosis. The thing
Yeah.
is, it causes significant impairment to your ability to be
Yes.
able to function every
There it
single
is.
day. Impacts your
Absolutely.
relationships, your
Mm-hmm.
job. That I think, and it's just sometimes I think part of us wanting to have this podcast is, of course, to provide that education, but for people to know because I see so many times on social media, therapists are like, y'all using the word wrong, just in
Mm-hmm.
general. Everyone's a narcissist and,
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
all of that. So it's
Mm-hmm.
important to make sure that we understand the terminology it is that we're using. And then so that way, when we do go seek help, I mean, of course, a therapist would be able to correct you anyway if they're a good therapist. But more so, I think it's important that we just understand, going back to Jordan's point, though, like how trauma shows up for us, how it impacts the
Mm-hmm.
body. And
Yes.
so if you can maybe
Mm-hmm.
even just talk about that, like, because I heard you brought up the example when you talked about like, oh, if you're, I am someone who is very easily startled.
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't have a diagnosis of PTSD, but there are, because of the fact, for instance, I watch my mom be verbally and physically abused. I often,
Mm-hmm.
as a child, felt like I was walking on eggshells,
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
just not knowing when it was about to pop off. So
Yeah.
I'm always very easily startled, just
Yeah.
because that's just kind of how it was in the household. So, like, even for instance, Jordan could be at my house and I know she's in the house. I know she's sitting in the living room. But when I come out of my room or the bathroom and I see her, like, I still will jump no matter what. Like, it's just
Yeah.
very hard for me not to be. That's it's just, and
Yeah.
so it takes a lot
And
to, I have to talk to myself within that moment, like, girl, you're safe. A fight is not breaking out right now.
right. And what you're mentioning is that natural, our body was created kind of that normal stress response. And that's your fight or flight kind of going in. I don't know what was around the corner. But I think the thing I really want to emphasize here is that trauma is individualized. What may be, I always think about 3 E's when you think about trauma. It's about events, experiences, and effects. And it's important to emphasize that because everyone's experience with trauma is going to be different. What may be, and again, I don't want to make it seem like we're, because we are overusing it, but what we want to emphasize is, like you said, the impact of how it impairs or impacts our quality of life. Our body is heightened. When trauma appears, it impacts our sensory. That's, I don't know if you've ever like walked into a place and a smell comes to you and it takes you right back to the moment where you or your body particularly experienced possibly, let me say it in this way, on a good say, like if you smell an apple pie, it may take you to grandma's house. But similar with trauma, a smell could take you right back to that moment and you are no longer like in your body. And so essentially, not to reference the book, but the body does keep score when it comes to trauma. Your senses are the things that really can either catapult us back as if we are in that very moment of that traumatic experience.
I'm glad you mentioned that. For me, my trauma manifested itself as hypervigilance.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember there was a time in undergrad where I had to avoid being around people as much as possible just for my
Yeah.
own mental sake. So I
Yeah.
would go to like the grocery store or wherever I needed to go in the middle of the night because I went to school in Atlanta and before the
Okay.
pandemic everything was 24 hours so you could go to
Mm-hmm.
Walmart at 3 o'clock in the morning. So I would do things like that. I
Mm-hmm.
especially for whatever reason I had to sit like in corners. I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't have someone sitting behind me.
Behind me.
I had
Mm-hmm.
to sit where I could see every possible threat coming.
Mm-hmm.
I remember being like that all throughout undergrad.
Yeah.
And even now, I mean, T-Kea and I went somewhere together earlier this week, and I had people sitting behind me. I was fine. But I remember
Mm-hmm.
a time where that could not happen. I just
Yeah.
always feel hyper vigilant. I think even if you see me in person or video, anything where you're like actually looking at me and I look like I'm stiff or tense, it's because I
Mm.
literally cannot physically relax.
Yeah.
To this
Yeah.
day, I cannot physically relax. I probably should see like I don't know who would help with that, maybe a massage therapist or something. But I hold a lot of tension in my upper body, a lot of tension in my shoulders, a lot of tension in my face. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just
Mm-hmm.
always like not necessarily jumpy,
Mm-hmm.
but I can just tell my body's just always
Like tense.
anticipating
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
something. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
And that's just the natural response. Like if you think about it, if you've had this overly exposure to feeling unsafe, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things in my work when I work with clients who've been impacted by trauma, I can't ask you what makes you feel safe because honey, your body's saying nothing. Don't ask me that question. That's not helpful. So I try to start off with like what makes you feel cozy? What makes you feel nice, right? Because the reality is your body is already anticipating it. Even though your mind may be like, I'm good, sometimes we have this mind body disconnect. And so, Jordan, to answer your question, one of the things, the practice that I work with in Annapolis, Anchor Hope Therapy, I'm really passionate about also integrative modalities. Because, like you said, well, what's going to help me with my body? Like, I'm doing all the talking, but my body's like, it's not catching up with us. And sometimes, when it comes to trauma work, we got to move beyond just traditional talk therapy. And so, one integrative modality that's very supportive for those who've been impacted with trauma is called craniosacral therapy. I don't know if y'all are aware of it, but it is a using kind of this. I don't want to say slow chiropractic because nothing's popping, but they really use kind of your like pressure points to help your body begin to feel safe in its body again. And it's powerful. Just in my own journey of healing, I got introduced to it several years ago because, like you, I was completely hypervigilant. Prior to my work in private practice therapy, I worked in juvenile justice, law enforcement, public safety. So hypervigilance was a good thing. it made you like, people were excited about it, but our bodies were never created to stay in that state. And so I had to find something beyond just talking to my therapist, because I was like, I'm getting these tools, but my body is like, no, it's not, that's not working. And so craniosacral therapy was a great addition to that traditional talk therapy for me.
Oh, I'm excited. You just told me something I did not know.
I
Um,
got you.
yeah, I always have that. I either feel numb or I feel tension mixed with pain. Like even now as I'm sitting
Hmm.
here, I kid you not, like the
Hmm.
side of my neck
Yeah.
hurts. It's just always
Mm.
something's always hurting, and I know it's just from being like, oh, just constantly revved up.
Yeah.
But a lot of my traumatic experiences actually occurred, for the most part, all of them, for the most part, in childhood. So I wanted you to talk about like the ACE scores, which I believe, if I'm correct, adverse childhood experiences, right?
Adverse childhood experiences. Yes.
Yes. So if you could talk
Yeah.
about that and how that relates to trauma, and maybe even how that could lead someone to feel suicidal at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. I had the wonderful opportunity in 2017 to actually be trained as a master trainer, one of the first cohorts in Maryland as a master ACE trainer. And average childhood experiences actually started on the West Coast. It started by Dr. Vincent Folletti, who was, I guess, he was like the chief medical over at Kaiser Permanente. And a lot of times when we think about ACEs, it's the 10 questions. It actually came out of a study with individuals who were having trouble losing weight. That's how it started. Yes. It
Oh.
started with individuals who had challenges with losing weight, and it later found out that the commonality, and he did this in partnership with Dr. Robert Anda, who's an epidemiologist, and helped with creating the ACEs scores. And they found out that there was correlation with weight loss challenges or obesity and trauma. And so the series of questions were 10 questions asking, have you ever been like shamed or attacked by your family, separation, anybody incarcerated, any sexual history of, abuse, things like that. I'm kind of paraphrasing them. And so the correlation found out that if you had a higher ACE score, you were more susceptible to chronic illnesses like obesity, early death, etc. And a lot of times when I talk about ACEs, um, the big thing to emphasize here is, again, it's not what's wrong with you, it's what's happened to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times, folks, it's normalized. If this is the upbringing that you came in, you didn't see it as trauma. But then all of a sudden you're going to the doctor, I'm having trouble with sleeping, I can't lose this weight. And then when we start going back in the childhood, we're recognizing our bodies went into what I like to call, we survived that hypervigilance or hypovigilance. I shut down, by adding the extra layer on my body, it made my body feel safe. Again, we don't look at it that way, but not recognizing that our survival coping strategies that we use, that led to obesity or led to alcoholism or led to all these things, were us trying to survive, but consequently it then leads to an early death.
It's interesting. I took a ACE training um, when I was pursuing my peer certification, and when I was in the training, I was just like, it just for some reason it just seemed like the light bulb went off
Mm,
in reference to some of my childhood trauma and like why I show up the way that I show up now.
hmm.
And I think a lot of times, many of us, especially for some people who haven't been through therapy, people will just think this is just the way that I am, not
Mm,
realizing that the we are a sum of our experiences. And
absolutely, absolutely.
sometimes many of us have blind spots, and it will take someone outside of ourselves to bring those behaviors to light. So
Hmm.
it's not
Yeah,
necessarily, yeah, this is how I am, but this is how I am is not necessarily, if we want to be mentally healthy and happy, this is how I am in some ways could be detrimental to our mental health if we don't actively work to change those behaviors and to also change our mindset.
Yeah. No, and facts, absolutely. And we also know that because trauma, we see it how it impacts our body, right? We got to also think about it. If we as children experience these very highly stressful things and our body, boom, if you think about your heart rate, boom, boom, and it's always up here, boom, 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 boom. As we were growing up, the things like in our brains, though, that neurodevelopment, the parts of us that externally learned how to engage in self and emotional regulation to bring us from here to here, there was no reference. Because a lot of times when children learn self regulation, it's through the eyes of their parents, it's or their guardians. I don't know if we know that. Like as a child,
Mm-hmm.
we naturally have the breath, but really our caregiver helps us to be able to model and build our ability for self and emotional regulation. And when we've experienced trauma at that time in childhood, that part gets disrupted. Then our social, emotional, and cognitive parts get impaired. And then, like we said, we go into those what we call risky behaviors, which I call survival coping strategies. And that it leads us to disease, disability, social problems, and then early death.
And you know what? I'm not sure if you wanted to bring it back up, Jordan, but you mentioned to Lauren about how trauma can the connection with suicide
Oh yeah.
that trauma can have. Now, that's not to say, put that disclaimer, just because someone experienced trauma, that does not mean that they will experience suicidal ideation or attempt. But for
Right.
some of us, there is a correlation. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, again, when we're thinking about trauma and we're thinking about that experience, sometimes those events can feel like we've lost control. We've lost our decision making power. Sometimes we get to a place of hopeless and deep desperation because of what has happened to us, that sometimes we feel like the only choice we have is that we have to die, that suicide is that. In regards to it, while it is a factor, the two things I think that's really important is a lot of times what people feel in trauma is hopelessness and loss of connection. And those are two factors that really get us to a place of suicidal desperation that may lead to that.
That was a good point. That was a good point. I think for me, again, a lot of my trauma happened during childhood, and I guess just watching my parents and the discord between them, it just always felt like something was coming around the corner, something was going to
Mm,
happen. Fortunately
yeah.
for me, with my parents, it was pretty easy to predict like when they were going to fight just based off of my father's work schedule. So my brother and
Mm,
I just kind of knew that it was going to come on Friday nights and Saturday nights.
hmm
But either way, I just remember like the build up throughout the week. I remember I used to hate Thursdays. Thursday was the day when I had to hurry up and get like everything done that needed to be done throughout the house, do the cleaning because I knew I was probably going to be camping out in my room or camping out in the basement with my brother just playing video games and trying to avoid like actually being around my parents. And I just remember I haven't thought about that in years. How
mm,
much I used to just hate Thursday because I just
mm,
knew the following day it was going to be popping. Because my father, his days off were Friday and Saturday for a long time, for most of my
mm,
childhood. And maybe when I got to, I'm going to say like ninth grade, my father started being off on Saturdays and Sundays. The
mm.
days just switched. Then I just started hating Fridays. But it's like my body just knew, man. Thursday, I get home from school, it's like, oh no, here we go. Especially on Friday, when I got on the bus and I was getting ready to go back home, there was just not going to be any peace until what, Sunday when we went back to work.
Mm,
It's crazy that I haven't thought about that in so long.
mm.
Trauma is so interesting. Like I feel like
Yeah.
it always comes back to me in bits and pieces.
Yeah.
Like there are
Mm,
things that I will distinctively remember, and then
yeah.
I'll have random memories, just like I did now. Because again, I haven't
Hmm.
thought about that.
Yeah.
Gosh, since I was probably 18 years old, my father passed
Yeah.
away. Um, man, it just comes and goes.
But you know what? That you said that, Lauren, you probably can speak to this too, because sometimes in order to protect ourselves, our bodies will we won't even remember it.
Yes.
So can you
Mhm.
talk
Yeah.
about that? It's our bodies, our brain, our bodies are very smart.
Yes, yes. I mean, the point of our bodies is to survive. And just as we talked about earlier, like that's what how trauma stores in our body. It could be a word, it could be a smell, it could be a sound, it could be something that in our how we feel in this moment that takes us right back to these parts. The one thing that is important to understand, like somebody who's experienced a very traumatic experience is not going to remember everything from chronological order. It comes in bits, it comes in pieces. And so that's something that just even in this moment, I appreciate Jordan your transparency of sharing your lived experience. That's how trauma shows up in us. It shows up in pieces. Um, and so, I don't want to go back and ask a question. I'm curious, like for you all in your own lived and journey experience, what helps you in those moments when it comes up? Like what happens and what helps you when you experience that?
I usually keep in mind, like, I'll try to ground myself really quickly.
Yeah.
So I'll do like the 5 things you see, 4 things you
Yep.
can touch.
Yep.
I normally will do that. And I
Hmm.
just keep telling myself as I'm engaging in that, like, the threat is over and you're safe now.
Yeah.
And normally by the time I get to the one thing you can taste,
Yeah.
I usually feel better.
Yeah.
And I realize that, even if I do have like flashbacks, which doesn't happen nearly as much as it used to, thank goodness,
Yeah.
I'm okay now. It's just a thought, it's just a memory. But right now, ground myself, I'm safe, nothing's hurting me.
Yeah.
And I will say with the memory thing, and I will paint this with a very, very broad stroke. I remember this one particular incident with my father, and it's so crazy because I remember the smallest details of it. Like, I remember that I had this white bed that was kind of like it was wooden. It was kind of like princess posts almost. So I had 4 of them in each of the corners. I remember that my comforter was like purple and blue, but I don't quite remember what the pattern was. I remember my father coming into my room, and I remember that he had on this like almost maroon colored like sweatshirt, and I remember him leaving, and that's it. You don't ask me anything that happened in between when he came in and when he left. But I remember what the bed looked like. It's so crazy. And I just take it as, you know what? My body is like, nah, Jordan, this, to keep you safe, we're just
Yeah.
going to delete that. And I am
Yeah.
so appreciative. And I'll have moments when I'm thinking like, wait, what happened? And I'm thinking really, really hard about it. But for whatever reason, it's like brain just hit delete,
Yep.
or it's either
Yep.
deleted or it's stored way, way,
Way,
way,
way far
way
back.
back somewhere.
And that's what our bodies do. They do
Yeah.
that, It's like, you know what? I'm going to keep you in this very, like, we're going to keep going, or I'm going to shut it down, or I'm going to put it in a place where now I can't access it. That part of my brain is like, nope, we're cutting that part off so that you are not constantly in this state. And yeah, that's what our bodies, like I say, our bodies are created to survive. And sometimes our responses may be experienced as personally shared in this moment.
Girl, I
Yeah.
don't know what's happening over here and why Lauren over here trying to make me cry and stuff, because I'm sitting here thinking to myself, I was like, wait, what do I do when I feel, triggered?
Yeah.
I just text Jordan.
Yeah.
Usually I text Jordan and we'll say like, this is what I'm feeling or this
Yeah.
is what's going on. But I don't know, as you were explaining, your bedroom and that whole thing, for some reason, I just had a moment of just like blinking out for a second.
Mm.
And I started thinking about, for me, how my trauma shows, and it's like it's a double-edged
Mm.
sword,
Mm.
because it's like I am super ambitious and goal
Mhm.
oriented and driven,
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
like I am very proud of my amazing work ethic. However,
Yeah.
I also realize it's a trauma response
Yes, it
because
is.
I have watched my mom struggle to survive.
Mm-hmm.
In my head, I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't want that struggle. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
a grinder, like, gotta get it done.
Yes.
Like, I
Mm-hmm.
am the to-do list queen, and everyone's like, oh my gosh, you're
Mm-hmm.
so inspirational. You're so,
Mm-hmm.
yes, I am, and I'm proud of myself. However, I have to learn when to be like, to turn it off, in the sense of like,
Mm-hmm.
it's okay to be passionate, to be goal oriented,
Yeah.
to be driven.
Yeah.
Those are not bad qualities, but it can't be to my demise,
Right.
and
Right.
that's,
Right.
as I was sitting, as Jordan was talking,
Mm-hmm.
and I just kind of blanked out for a moment, I started getting
Yeah.
emotional
Mm-hmm.
because there's a part of me, of that little girl, that never really felt safe.
Safe. Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's why
Yeah.
my work ethic is the way that it is. And it's very hard for me to turn it off
Yeah.
sometimes. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I'm just getting very
Yeah.
emotional here, in the sense that I have to tell myself, like, you're okay, you're safe.
Yeah.
But yeah, just watching that, like, my dad had
Mm-hmm.
struggled with addiction, and
Mm-hmm.
he was in and out of jail most of my
Mm-hmm.
life. And I watched my mom. She's super, super strong. She was able to eventually leave
Mm-hmm.
a emotionally and physically abusive relationship. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad that she's in a much happier and healthier space.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I admire her ability to be resilient and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But even watching her struggle like that had a direct impact on me. And that's
Mm-hmm.
why, and I've always been that way, even as a kid in college. Like, I've always been that way. And it's just like, I still do to this day have a very hard time knowing when to cut it off, because it's like,
Mm-hmm.
and my one of my friends' mom always says, like, T-Kea, you're the next Oprah. It's a joke. It's like a running joke, but it's more so
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, I don't know if I have dreams of being Oprah, but I am big on, in the sense of like, I want to make sure that I leave my mark in the world. That's something
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
important to me. But all
Yeah.
of that to say, knowing when to cut it off is very, very challenging for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And if I may respond to that, if I can, first I want to just acknowledge and celebrate you in sharing that. One of the things I always say to folks who either come in contact with me or worked with me, I always say that self-awareness is the first step to true and sustainable change and liberation. And my response to you about cutting it off, I challenge it a bit. More so, I encourage you to bring awareness to it, right? Because in some way it serves you, right? Hear how when we even talk about risky behaviors, or you've heard that term, like, your work ethic, it serves you. It helps you to survive. The awareness comes is it coming at the detriment to me? And what
Hmm.
do I need to help me feel safe in this moment again, so that I'm not leaning into that trauma response? Not necessarily saying I got to cut it off, because sometimes we can internalize that, right? Where it's like I'm doing something wrong, when the reality is you're surviving. Does that make sense what I'm
Hmm.
saying? I don't
Yeah.
know
That makes
how that
sense.
resonates with you.
No, yeah, it does. It does. Because it's not a matter of, I guess, that I have to turn it off. It's just
Yeah,
more so, like you said, having the level of awareness.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and it is challenging sometimes, in the sense that I do have a bipolar diagnosis. So it's
Mm-hmm.
just like a melting pot of just
Yeah,
like ambition, or all this fuel and this energy. You feel like, you know, Jordan,
mhm,
I have the zoomies sometimes, and sometimes just
yeah,
not knowing when to be like, girl, sit down,
mhm, yeah,
Um, but yeah, it is helpful, and now that you said that, I'm really gonna, I'm gonna
yeah,
sit with that. Like,
yeah.
I'm gonna sit with that. I'm gonna have to
My
get back
approach,
to you too on that.
yeah. And I respect that, and I applaud and celebrate that. I mean, my approach when it comes to trauma, I try to look at it from a growth and affirming way, right? I look at our mental health challenges as a superpower. I really do. I have a girlfriend of mine who has a diagnosis of attention deficit hyperactive disorder, has a lot of trauma, and she has built a multi-million-dollar massage therapy company. She found a way to tap into her challenge, the thing that was serving as a barrier, found it as a superpower. Now, please, I'm not condoning us to burn ourselves and burn the candle from both ends. But what happens if we, instead of looking at what's wrong with us, and I'm just saying this more general, in a place of what has happened to us and how we can use it to our benefit and to our work. And as I, not to jump from where you all are going, but my own lived experience with mental health challenges and my own attempt was the catalyst for me in this work. If I, for me personally, looked at it at the way that traditional practitioners or even the church, I'm gonna just keep it real, was looking at it, it would have destroyed me. I was ready to die because I just felt hopeless, like something was wrong with me. And it was just that one connection that made me look at what was happening to me in a different way, that moved me into a direction to see that what has happened to me can help save other people's lives and also create spaces where hope and healing were possible.
Mm.
Ooh.
I
You
knew
just
this episode was gonna be fire, y'all. I knew.
no, because Lauren went ahead and went to because we were going to ask about that moment. Can you
Yeah,
maybe go back a little bit to
yeah,
talk about like what what got you to that point of hopelessness
sure,
and where you were like,
absolutely.
I just don't want to be here anymore. Can you
Yeah.
kind of go back to that time?
Absolutely. And as I always say, like I said, this is a journey. And, anybody who's listening, look, you have a story. All parts of your story matters, even the messy parts. And the one thing that I encourage you as you're listening is learn how to speak your story from your scars, not from your wounds. That's important because sometimes we can take people deep and it can take them back and unzip them, right? And so as I share, I'm going to share what I say is sharing from my scars. All in a period of 12 months, I lost my uncle to murder, my childhood best friend to suicide, and I lost my marriage. I was married to a pastor who started a family without me. I was a counselor in high security prison for women who were and counseling women who basically killed their spouses or partners for what my spouse at the time did. Um, I was in a place that I'm trying to be a therapist, and I couldn't save the two people that I felt were the closest to me. In that moment, my body started failing me due to chronic stress and anxiety. I wasn't sleeping. I mean, I literally was killing. I mean, excuse me, but I was really crushing it at work. I mean, I was responsible for 240 women of a 1,200 bed facility, and I was getting ready to be promoted as the youngest institutional program manager at this facility. I was crushing it, but inside, I was not paying attention to all the signs. So before my mind recognized what was going on, my body started shutting down. And if I be very transparent, white chocolate Wednesdays was my jam. I started drinking heavily, and my attempt, consisted of drinking and having a plan. And I was so grateful to have neighbors who had keys to my house to check on me. That they check on me, they found me, and after spending some time in inpatient psychiatric care, feeling the direct experience of how sterile it was, recognizing that the people who were there to support me saw me almost like an inmate. It wasn't compassionate. I knew that there was a reason my life was spared that day. That there was some work to be done after I started doing my healing, and I wanted to be a part of that change. And so that's kind of the beginning of it for me.
Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Yeah.
I worked in I worked in juvenile detention, and I also worked in community corrections with probation. So
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
I'm so
And
glad you got to share your story.
yeah, if I may add to it, even working in a rural area in the state of Virginia,
Mhm.
turnover rate was low. How I got my job, and this is hard because one of the things of why I started my business is because the helping profession is struggling. Um, the person who had my job died by suicide, and the rates amongst helping professions, law enforcement, are significantly high for suicidality. Yeah.
I'm just speechless.
Me too.
And
That was
I'm
my point in saying that I also worked in, you know,
Hmm.
the same fields because as you
Yeah.
know, T-Kea knows I've always worked in some type of helping profession. I think
Yeah.
it was just a part of, seeing so much suffering and pain as a child.
Yeah.
Like I wanted to help others.
Yeah.
So I feel you on that.
Yeah. And a lot of times we get into this work and this call because of that. I saw it.
Mhm.
I want to be a part of the change. But many of us get into this work and we bleed on those who didn't cut us.
Oh Lord.
Because again, you know, and I don't mean to get there, but again, that's why I'm doing this work. I wanted to be on the side. I came out of systems because systems is going to do what systems do. They are about managing, and no disrespect, but they weren't built to heal. They weren't built to heal. And a lot of times, folks who are in it, they come in with the passion and the calling to make a difference, but the system unfortunately perpetuates at times harm. And we experience as helping professionals the vicarious trauma through the stories, right? Exposure to the trauma by proxy, and there's not space available for us to heal. And the tools that are there in some systems, EAP is used as a reprimand. So you're like, well shoot, like I'm trying to get help, but then y'all are blackballing me. Where can I go? And then we begin to hold it in. We get to this place of desperation, and I emphasize that we get to a place of hopelessness, loss of connection, desperation, that then we might get to that decision where we say the only thing I can do is die. Yeah.
Which would bring us to our question, talking about the importance of trauma informed care and what is trauma informed care to people who are listening and may not know.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that y'all asked that. I know that it's like sometimes used as kind of this coin phrase, but I tell you, I have seen systems that are intentional about it. And so, to give a definition of what trauma informed care is, essentially, it is the acknowledgement and need, the acknowledging the need to understand a person's life experience in order to deliver effective care. Understanding that we begin to look at things from those who we've been called to help, and but we got to look at it from their place. So let me give you an example because I feel like I'm more of an example. Um, if you've ever been to an emergency room, I intentionally want to give you this visual. What do you see when you think about a traditional emergency room? What do you think about?
Noise.
Noise.
Yes.
I
Okay.
think of
Yeah.
white walls and it's all sterile
Yes.
and
There it is.
it doesn't give me peace and tranquility,
Again. Hmm.
rehabilitation. That's what it's supposed to be, but that's not what I get.
Okay. Yeah. You get noise, white walls, sterile, sometimes very cold. Sometimes you see the glaring red emergency. Does that feel safe in our bodies? Not all the time. Now we get it. When it's of urgency, we want to know where to get somewhere. But if we begin to look through the eyes of the person that we've been entrusted to care for, there's a beautiful example. I don't know if y'all have ever been to St. Agnes Hospital in Baltimore, Maryland. But when you go into the emergency room, there is a place where it says patients are our passion, physicians and associates are our pride, and healing is our joy. And it's in this soft, like earthy brown color. And it says reverence, respect for diversity. I mean, like this is in the emergency room. And what I'm saying is just even the way that visually a space can look, how your environment is intentional to understanding those coming in the door means that we begin to look through a lens of thinking about if I were that person who is in need of care and needs to feel as safe as possible in my body, what could I do differently? Does that make sense? What I'm
Yes.
saying? Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I think just going through the thinking through the lens that despite what it is, everyone has some form of trauma. Now, we
Hmm.
know that there's a variation, but when you think about it, there's no one way to treat a person. So, trauma informed care would mean that each patient has individualized care.
That's right. We have to be responsive. We have to be able, because even just like trauma is an individualized experience, but also trauma informed care has to meet everyone as best as possible in an individualized way. Absolutely.
Well, Lauren, please tell us about the Journey to Well, your business, and where people can find you.
Absolutely. The Journey to Well LLC was created for the essential purposes of helping those who help others help well. We provide training, consulting, and supports to helping organizations as well as government organizations to learn how to get equipped to bring awareness to creating healthier and well environments so folks who help others help well. Also, I am a psychotherapist, and you can find more information about me at anchoredhopetherapy.com. And you can also follow me on IG and Facebook at The Journey, the number two well, and also visit www.thejourneytowell.com.
Yeah, and we're going to have all of those links that we mentioned. They will all be in the show notes.
Yep.
So you can easily refer back to them. But Lauren, we just want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us in this space to discuss trauma,
Yeah, thank you for having me.
absolutely to humanize clinicians, because
Yeah,
I don't know, while some people just think that life is not happening for clinicians or people in the helping profession, like, you
facts.
all have life happening to you as well. You're not
Yeah,
exempt. And many of us who get into the spaces because we can identify, we know what it's like to be in those spaces. So thank you so much
absolutely.
for joining us and just bringing your vibrant
Yes.
energy to the space.
Thank you for having me, and thank you all for the wonderful work that y'all do.
Thank you. So, for every episode, we like to shine a spotlight on someone who has either passed away from suicide, survived a suicide attempt, has a connection to suicide. And today we are going to do Marshawn McCarrel. He was a Black Lives Matter activist that ended up passing away on the Statehouse steps in Ohio. I think he got his start as like a poet on campus. He was helping to feed the homeless and the hungry, and then he got into activism for police brutality. So I know he helped Tamir Rice's family organize their, protests after his death, and he ended up dying by suicide. He was actually he was recognized at the NAACP Awards a week prior to his death for his activism, so he was very, very notable in that space. His last Facebook post, hours before his death, stated, quote, "My demons won today. I'm sorry." And he died by suicide on February 8th, 2016, at the age of 23. To Marshawn, we just want to say thank you for everything that you have done to shed light on police brutality, and we definitely want to lift up your memory. And then for today's resource, we're going to do the Journey to Well, which is Lauren's organization. She created the site to help individuals and organizations connect to resources, training opportunities, and supportive tools and services that she believes will be helpful to people on their healing journey. So you can check her out at thejourneytowell.com, and that journey 2 is the number 2. And we'll leave everything in the show notes description box so that you can connect with her if you would love to.
Yes, and our community change maker, Nicole Pierre Smith, who is a LPC or licensed professional counselor, and she's also the creator of Melanated Women's Health LLC in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And her practice offers compassionate and anti-oppressive therapy services. And Nicole also specializes in trauma. Y'all see it's a theme here. We try to keep our shows with a theme. And she specializes, again, in trauma, so such as post-traumatic stress disorder, and also EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So you can follow Nicole on Instagram at Melanated Women's Health. And then also, have you ever done EMDR?
I have it, but I want to try it.
Yeah, so I have a friend slash big sister mentor who specializes in it, and I remember we spoke at an event together, and she brought like the tapping that they use. And at first I was like, are y'all trying to hypnotize people? She's like, no, it's not hypnosis. That's what I thought it was at first. She's like, no, that's not what it is. But it works really well for a lot of people, and people have a lot of success with EMDR. So if you're someone who struggles with trauma and you feel like it's impacting you, and maybe CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is not the best modality for you, maybe you might want to try EMDR. So we would encourage you to check that out. And now moving on to self-care. Jordan, why did you make that face?
Oh, you know what? I should make that face. So I'm happy to report that things were going much better with swim class, because I just needed to, throw that out there. My strokes were looking so much better come the end of it. You know what I mean? It's just a stamina thing. I'm going to have to keep doing it in order to, build up my ability to breathe properly and make it all the way across the pool. But I think I started off that first class. I don't even think I could swim half a lap. But by the time I got to the end, I was going up and down the pool like several times. So I'm very, very happy. That was a story of perseverance, because at first I was like, oh, I can't swim anymore. Yes, I could. You just have to get back into it. You know what I'm saying? And it all came back to me. I can't even say like riding a bike, because I feel like I've probably said this in a prior episode, but for the newbies, I forgot how to ride a bike, so I can't even use that analogy.
I feel like I don't think you forgot how to ride a bike. I can't.
I don't know. I'm just that special of a person.
I just feel like, I don't know. Maybe you're not giving yourself credit, or you really think you don't know how to ride a bike.
I'm just,
Or you really forgot.
I really feel like I forgot. My balance is bad. I always feel like I'm about to fall off. I can't start right. I can't stop right. So I can't use that analogy. But with swimming, it did come back to me. Maybe that's something I should start doing. I'm sorry.
Dr. Walker. I'm calling Dr. Walker.
There's a previous episode, if you all want to listen, with Dr. Rita Walker, the esteemed Dr. Rita Walker.
Yes, we love Dr. Walker.
And she told me I shouldn't be shoulding on myself, but you see, it's a work in progress.
She says that it's best to say, it would instead of saying it would be helpful, it would be helpful versus I should, because if we should on ourselves, it makes us feel bad.
Yes.
And it works against us. So it would be helpful, or it would be beneficial. That's what we try to. So we call each other out when we should.
Yes.
So.
It would be helpful if I actually took my bike out of the shed, put air in my tires, and, went out for a ride. I'm sure it will come back to me almost like swimming did. So if I could, learn to swim again or get back in that motion, I'm sure I can do the same for a bike. I can do the same for a bike.
Yes, you can. I think I can.
Where's Thomas the Train when you need him?
Right. We just over here with the PBS. I'm feeling very Mr. Rogers with my socks going on over here. Leon, get my socks.
Yes, zoom in. Yes, come on, socks.
I'm feeling very Mr. Rogers today. I just feel like I just need to take my shoes off. But
he's representing today.
Yes, Howard University, the real HU. And if you're listening and you went to Hampton, I love you. I have friends who went to Hampton. Okay, it's all fun. But despite what y'all say, the truth of the matter is, y'all were the institute, okay? And then y'all changed over to the university, So, it's relative, but it's all HBCU love over here.
Yes.
So, for self-care for me, you know what? I was thinking today as I was cleaning, we got to get Patrice Washington on the podcast, man. I need y'all to look up the Redefining Wealth podcast. Outside of Black People Die by Suicide too. Patrice Washington is my favorite podcast. It is amazing. It's on personal development and finance. She's a financial psychologist. So she talks about how these 6 pillars in our life have the ability to impact our finances. And I'm not going to get into all of it because that's a whole podcast episode, but you should definitely check out the Redefining Wealth podcast. And it has changed my life. And so I say that to say one of her pillars is space. And you don't think, and even Lauren talked a little bit about like how our space impacts us. Like how do our space make us feel? And I was cleaning and I started realizing how I do not like doing anything domestic. I'm not that girl. But I'm a boss girl. I can write a marketing plan. I do great public speaking, but I don't like cleaning up. Needless to say, what I've come to as I was cleaning, I realized how once I got to a good space, even though I'm still cleaning, I've made it further along and I'm like, oh, I like how this makes me feel in the sense of after it's done.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had Febreze, I had my eucalyptus, my diffuser on. I was burning my candles. I had all of these smells and these scents and my bed was made and all this and I was just like, dang, this feels so good. As relates to self-care. Not the act of cleaning, but when it's done, when it's clean and when it smells great, like that makes me feel good. So there's a pillar in Patrice Washington's 6 pillars. One of them is space. Mm-hmm. And it's like making sure that even those junk drawers that we have and all of those little nook and cranny spaces that just have papers, like how that actually like impact like the workspace and like it can impact your ability to be creative and like get work done. And that's why like I'm big on, like Jordan knows, like my favorite color is orange. I have a huge orange accent wall in my house, but it brings me joy. Like it makes me happy. Like I love sitting in my space and seeing that bright orange wall because it makes me happy. So for me, I feel like for self-care, what I've done what I'm working to do is making sure that my space, is because it impacts my mental health. Like if my house is like in disarray and it's like dishes all over like it don't make me feel good,
That makes sense.
So yeah, I've been working on my space pillar and making sure that like I just need my space to feel good. Like I'm about to do like a little bit of some enhancements in my space just because I want to make sure like how it smells, how it looks. So that's what self-care has been for me. And also, as I mentioned in the episode earlier, that I've been getting sleep. So
Y'all,
sleeping in my space.
T-Kea Renee Blackman, that's not her middle name, but that's my middle name for her. T-Kea Renee Blackman got some sleep. Leon, I'm going to need you to put the hand clap in there. The applause is
or the bam, 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 bam,
something. Yes. T-Kea Renee got her some sleep. I am so proud of her.
Y'all, no, for real. I'm not even joking to y'all. I work like 60 hours a week. I'm not even joking. I have been exhausted. Black people die by suicide too is just one thing that's on my plate. And I couldn't do it without Jordan, y'all. I'm telling y'all, I could not. Black people die by suicide too. We would be failing. So
glad I can support you.
So I'm glad our baby is healthy because it takes parents, okay? Right. Mama, daddy, 2 mamas, however you want to call it, that's how it's working. We also have some volunteers that just started. So that's, helping. Our board members are, great. So that keeps the baby going. But yeah, so that's self-care.
Fantastic. We just want to tell you all to, if you listen to this episode and you got something out of it, definitely leave us a comment. We would absolutely love to hear from you. Follow us on social media, Instagram, Black People Die by Suicide too. TikTok the same.
Yes, and don't Facebook, y'all. Well, hopefully by the time y'all listening to this, Facebook has got its act together. My Facebook was hacked. So, and I forgot to add Jordan as a manager or another person as a manager. So since I was the only one who had access, when my account got hacked, we lost access to our Facebook account. So now it may take us a while to actually get our Facebook account back up and running, because it's okay. You live and learn. So now when we get access, multiple people will have access to the Facebook account. So that way we don't got to worry about that. But yeah, definitely, as Jordan mentioned, please make sure that y'all are, if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, to help us go further up in the algorithm, if you click a 4-star review or 5-star review, and you leave a actual review as well, that helps push us up the algorithm. So please do that for Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And for our moment of inspiration, Jordan.
Yes. So as we mentioned, of course, the theme of the day has been trauma. And I just want to encourage people and let you know that trauma doesn't have to define you. It doesn't have to cost you your peace. Take it from me, someone with post-traumatic stress disorder, it could definitely rob you of your experiences now and in the future, but it doesn't have to be that way. I was constantly tripping over things that were behind me, constantly, but you can work past that. And there's this lady on Etsy who sells these really, really pretty, they're like mental health inspirational quotes. So I have a bunch of them that I've purchased from her throughout the years. And I have one behind me that says, "If yesterday is heavy, put it down." And T-Kea brought up an excellent point when we were talking about this earlier, that's probably easier said than done. But the reason I guess I purchased that was because it's a constant reminder that the things that I went through, I don't have to carry those burdens by myself alone anymore. By putting it down, I'm essentially reaching out to other people to help me carry that load. It doesn't have to be all on my shoulders anymore. So I just want to encourage people that, if you have gone through something traumatic, a lot of us have, especially as African Americans, there's racial trauma, just all sorts of things. You don't have to carry this by yourself. There are people out there like Lauren that can help you. Just begin to start taking that off your shoulders, getting it closer to the ground so it'll be off you and you can move on. Don't know if there's something you want to add.
No, I mean, I think in the practical sense, though, putting it down could be journaling about it.
Mm-hmm.
Putting it down could be going for a walk and listening to an audiobook or a podcast, listening to some music. Putting it down could be sharing it with a friend. Putting it down could be working through it in therapy. There's no one way to put it down, but I think the consensus is that, you don't have to deal with it alone.
Right.
And yes, it is easier said than done, but if we continue to carry things from our past, we'll never be able to experience the joy of life.
Yes, the joy of now, the joy of the future.
Yeah.
So that wraps up another episode. Thank you guys for tuning in. Again, leave us a comment, a like. We would love to hear from you. Until next time, see ya.